All right, this session is entitled Government Innovation. And we're going to hear from a government panel. And I'd like to ask them if they want to come up to the front here. We have Jeff Seltzer, Christopher Beck, Erin Garnaas-Holmes, and Katherine Rainone. And so if you just come up here and then I'll introduce the moderator. So the moderator for this session is Jeff Seltzer. He is the Deputy Director for the Natural Resources Administration, where he is responsible for programs that conserve, protect, and improve the water, soil, and living resources of the District of Columbia. Jeff has been with the agency since 2010 and previously served as the Associate Director of the Stormwater Management and Water Quality Division, where he led efforts to update the district's water quality planning documents and accelerate retrofitting the built environment with green infrastructure. Jeffrey is a professional civil engineer with over 30 years of experience in environmental restoration and resource management. Jeffrey owned his bachelor's degree from Penn State University as a graduate of the George Washington University Executive Leadership Program. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Seltzer.
There you go. All right. All right. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks. I really appreciate ICPRB organizing this and Fairfax Water hosting this event. As others have mentioned, this is a great opportunity to collaborate. And particularly for me, coming from district government as a resident and as a representative, I can't think of a better case of why this collaboration is important. For folks that don't know, all of the drinking water in the district comes from the Potomac River. And that source of that drinking water is upstream of the district. So, the collaboration and the efforts from, our neighboring jurisdictions, Maryland and Virginia, are critical to our resiliency and the health and life of district residents. So, just appreciate everyone being here. I'm also very privileged to work for the district government. We're the equivalent of a state agency. And, as others, I think Katie mentioned, innovation happens at the local level. And it's very exciting to be a part of that. We're all, planning for the future while we do our best to reduce our impacts and leading by example. We're starting to see success from all that work. Mike mentioned this Saturday, we're supposed to have a splash event where we swim in the Anacostia River for the first time in many decades. Unfortunately, I just looked at my phone and there's a gale warning and it's supposed to be blowing 30 miles an hour and maybe coming down with a couple inches of rain. So we seem to be having some bad luck with that, but we'll see how it goes. We're also seeing other signs of improvement from all of our work. We have nesting and breeding bald eagles in the district. We have river otters, lots of, anecdotal signs that we are making some great progress. So appreciative of all that. And with that, I will introduce our first speaker here on this panel. Christopher Beck serves as the Deputy Manager for the Climate Change Program at Maryland Department of Environment. He is leading statewide planning, including some of the most ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals in the country. And those goals include a 60% reduction of statewide greenhouse gases by 2031. Chris is a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and has a degree in public health. Thanks. Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to talk about climate change, something that I'm sure everyone is familiar with and likely passionate about, like me. I'm an air person. I did serve some time in the Maryland Department of the Environment Water Sciences Administration in the TMDL division, and that I've never been the same since. So for a year, I wrote TMDLs. They thought that was a good idea because I wrote air permits. Thankfully, when MDE decided that it was important, this was a long time ago, I'm dating myself, that climate change be a program, they recruited me into the climate program. So I've been in the climate program since it was born. It had previously been part of air quality planning. So we're officially a program and we're off to the races. So I'm just going to talk about how what we've been doing to achieve the climate pathway, which is part of a process that I'll share details about. We're at a unique time in Maryland's development of a statewide plan to reduce greenhouse gases, because in June, well, first of all, I'll speak to it, but in June, we released this pathway. That's why it's called, that's why it's in the title here. And then we have to quickly turn around from June to December what Maryland's actual plan is to reduce greenhouse gases 60% by 2031 and maintain a path to net zero by 2045. So in the next 6 months, I'm currently writing that plan now with my team, relatively small team. And we're seeking input from the public through a series of outreach sessions, also known as listening sessions, where we just ask the public to chime in on what they think our plan should say, and how far it should go, and how it can achieve a very, very ambitious goal of 60%. I can't stress enough how ambitious this goal is. I just was coming through my emails, and I got an email from the modeling team that said, Chris, we're not there. We are running out of options. So I can't stress enough how ambitious this goal is, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, we're already a leader. We've managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions faster than almost any other state, even California. A lot of that has to do with the fuel switching from coal to natural gas, but we won't get into that now. But we have been a leader, and we are continuing to press forward as a leader. The 60% goal is more ambitious than any other U.S. state. Yeah, so we've got our work cut out for us. The goal from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, acronym GGRA, was 40 by 30. The passage of the Climate Solutions Now Act in 2022 ratcheted up the ambition by a significant amount to be a 60% goal. And the long-term goal, which I think is applicable to this audience, is that net zero goal by 2045, because we can't reduce gross emissions to zero. So we need to sequester carbon, and it's folks in this room that really can be leaders on ways to implement solutions, natural solutions that also protect water quality, to sequester that remaining percentage that we won't be able to reduce. Also, we call that hard to decarbonize sectors, like making cement, for example. Why are we so ambitious? Because we're vulnerable. We're higher than average. We're wetter than average. This isn't news. We've got 3,100 miles of shoreline that are especially vulnerable. So this makes good sense that we're leading this charge. This slide is relevant, I think, to everyone. Personally, I've got a bunch of kids. They're finally old enough to enjoy skiing. I bought a season pass last year. I just didn't use it. So I like to fish. I understand how important it is for the temperatures to stay where they need to be for trout. I grew up on the Lac River Reservoir. So the fish. I understand that the fish populations are dependent on many things, and one of them is this temperature. The upper right there's an icon for intensifying heat raises energy bills. One of the biggest challenges that I have as a policymaker is putting forward policies that won't increase ratepayer fees. So we have to do a lot to reduce greenhouse gases, and some of those policies are going to cost people money. And the folks that can't afford already expensive energy bills cannot afford to have more expensive energy bills. So one of the biggest challenges that we face in fighting climate change is reducing greenhouse gases, cleaning up the energy supply without increasing costs to those that can't afford it already. So that's something that we're really mindful of, because the response to a hot day is to crank up the air conditioner, and those prices of those kilowatts during those hours are more expensive than any other time of the year, and folks are really hit hard when they're forced to do that. So one of my challenges is in fighting climate change is doing it equitably and making sure that everyone can participate in the fight and also not be penalized in having to do so. We talked about it earlier. So the 2006 is the baseline. So all of our math is based on what we were emitting in 2006. So all the progress that we measure is off that 06 baseline. And we show the net zero goal here. The pathway, I refer to it, the pathway was written by the Center for Global Sustainability at UND. My small team doesn't have the modeling capacity or the tools to develop to do the emission modeling. So we commissioned a report by the University of Maryland, recruited the best scientists, and blamed them for what the report said. The June report said that we have to do all this, and it's gonna hit all the sectors, and it's gonna hit all the residents of Maryland, and it's gonna be hard. So we pointed to that report by the scientists and said, okay, this is what the scientists said we need to do. So we're gonna write a plan based on that. So all the sectors are impacted. So the current situation is all the policies on the books get us to 51%. And what's important about that bullet is all the policies on the books get us to 51% if we implement them. They're already ambitious. And I'm pretty sure that we're not implementing them at the rate we need to. So in order to get to 51 with the current policies, we have to implement them to perfection. That ain't happening. The pathway also shows sector by sector where the opportunities to reduce emissions further. That's roughly 9 million metric tons. It's a lot. It's a heavy lift there beyond the 51% that we're already getting. So we're going to need all societies. We're going to need all of government, all of local jurisdictions. Thankfully, we have the feds behind us right now. Hopefully that lasts. So it's an all society approach, and it's going to require all of us to participate in this. How do we do it? Well, the governor has a goal and it's not clearly defined what exactly the governor means by 100% clean electricity, but we're working it out, figuring it out, and the partners with our energy administration to figure out what exactly does 100% clean electricity mean, because we import 40% of our electricity from other states, and those electrons are not clean. So we also generate a bunch of electricity in the state, and those aren't clean either. So by 2035, we have committed to figure out a way to get to 100% clean electricity. We have to electrify all of our cars. We have to electrify all of our buildings. So we ask that everyone in this room consider the next time they buy a car, or the next time they replace their fossil-fired equipment in their homes, or their heat pump, or their hot water heater goes up, they need to replace that with an electric piece of electric equipment. We have to replace all of our fossil fuel-fired equipment with electric equipment. There's no other way around. And it's going to be expensive. So it's extremely expensive. So as a climate change professional, one of the biggest challenges I have is to figure out how we can subsidize the cost of that for low to moderate income individuals, because we can't do it without them, and we need to subsidize. Also, there's other things that are going to be really hard to decarbonize, like cement, for example. We need to come up with creative ways to incentivize the decarbonization of industry. And we got to plant about 5 million trees would be a great start, because we need to sequester a ton of carbon. So, I would encourage that. I thought I could come and talk to this audience about how important it is to plant trees. I don't need to do that. The question is 5 million enough? Is that a good enough goal? Because we probably need to plant more. So what does our plan say? Well, it's not written yet. So this is what it might say. Well, it has to say that we're going to reduce emissions 60% by 2031, because that's what the law says it has to say. So we have to figure out a way to do that. We're gonna produce a plan in December that says what we need to do, and it also has to keep us on the path to 2045. It also, according to the statute, it has to strengthen our economy. The plan cannot have a negative impact on the economy. It has to create jobs. It's in the statute. If it doesn't, then the law sunsets. It's going to improve public health, because when you reduce combustion, you improve public health. All the other things that it's going to do, like create a healthier planet for our children, which is why I'm in this business, basically. And it's also going to create jobs and create economic opportunity for many Marylanders. So what can policymakers like me do to realize these reductions? Well, we have to engage partners like the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, who is an independent body. It's bipartisan. There are representatives on the commission that they counsel for buildings that are regulated by our laws. So the commission is bipartisan. There are folks on that commission that really want to push ahead. There are folks on that commission that really want to do it at a pace slower than we need to. So that commission is diverse. It's generally supportive. It has been extremely supportive in the past, but now that the rubber's starting to hit the road, the commission is starting to get really nervous about how far can the state go. So we're at that point now where the commission is going to have to stand behind us as we move forward, but it's also bipartisan. So there's no guarantees that there's going to be consensus that Maryland is going at the right rate to reduce emissions. But the commission was responsible for advancing legislation that got through the Maryland General Assembly that gave us this goal in the first place. So we wouldn't be anywhere without the commission. But at this point, the commission is going to have to. It might be challenging to get consensus on ambition. One of the work groups of the commission are as follows: the Adaptation and Resiliency Work Group. They are really focused on the work of many in this room. So while my job is focused on mitigation and reducing emissions, there's an Adaptation and Resiliency focus group that really tries to address some of the issues that we talked about earlier today, and then we'll talk about later today. It's held at the Department of Natural Resources, and they really go all in on making sure that climate change is also focusing on adaptation and resiliency. Education, community, and outreach, I'm doing that now. That's another work group to make sure that all Marylanders are on board. And the scientific and technical folks, they're the ones that produce the sea level rise report and digest the latest science and advise the commission on how far we need to go. So these are the implementation opportunities. I won't go through all these, but there's the equitable transition is mentioned there, the economic development. These are co-benefits of decarbonizing electricity. It's basically, I like to think of my job as just catalyzing a giant construction project. So we have to build, we have to replace, and we have to build, and we have to replace machines that currently produce greenhouse gases that can no longer produce greenhouse gases. And we need to clean up our buildings, and we need to do it affordably. Overcoming barriers to these things is really just really a financial problem mostly. Just getting that infrastructure built and subsidizing the cost to offset the difference. Although I will say that we're reaching parity on many of these. For example, a lot of electric vehicles are reaching price parity with gas-powered vehicles. The question is, are people confident enough to charge them? We mentioned the decarbonizing the industrial sector. That's going to be challenging. That's where we're going to need sequestration to come into play, because at the end of the day, we're going to need to sequester roughly about 15 million metric tons on our ag lands, in our forests, and in our wetlands. So as part of our climate change pathway plan, I'll personally lean heavily on facilitating those processes that allow for sequestering carbon in our natural working lands, and that starts with measuring it effectively, like we heard about earlier today. But just making sure that we have some insurance in 2045 when we realize that we can't decarbonize the economy like we know we need to. What are the rewards? Well, there's plenty: clean air, healthier buildings, no fossil fire boilers in the basement, no oil tanks, better transportation options. That's a toughie. One of the things that I speak to stakeholders about is how we're going to electrify the transportation fleet. And I drove from Baltimore here, so I sat in traffic. Needless to say, there's too many cars. So what can we do to incentivize people to get out of their cars and use transit? Well, it's really tough, and people say, and it's really expensive to change the way the transportation system works. And people and the modelers say, well, that doesn't really move the needle, Chris. Well, there's certain things that we need to do that don't necessarily move the GHG needle, but we're going to do it anyway. We're almost finished. Are Maryland's ready? I think they are. Polls say they are. What's next? I mentioned earlier that the plan's being developed. One of the key findings that we've concluded on our team is that we have the authority under the Climate Solutions Now Act to regulate our way to this goal. So with the governor's buy-in, we'll advance regulations that will probably hit every sector. And we can't trust that the legislature will agree that we need to move this fast. But MDE believes that it has the authority to advance regulations that reduce emissions across many of the sectors that we talked about today. And that will be the approach that we take. The regulations will not be articulated in the December plan, but the commitment will be made in December to start working on those regulations under the authority that we already have. This is the last slide. Yeah, this is what the December plan might look like. So this is hot off the press. Of course, MDE is going to hold a pen in writing the plan, but we're going to work with all of our partner agencies in collaboration to develop policies that make sense to other agencies, because they're the ones that are going to have to implement many of the policies in the plan. That's the last slide. There's time for comments over there. Okay. Okay, super. Anyway, thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Chris. So next, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague at District Department of Energy and Environment, Erin Garnaas-Holmes. Erin works with me in our agency on the district's climate adaptation plans, which includes the Climate Ready DC plan, which is a climate adaptation, the Keep Cool DC plan, which is a plan for extreme heat adaptation. Erin has graduate degrees in landscape architecture and urban planning, and has advanced equitable planning and ecological design for over 10 years.
Hello. Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Erin Garnaas-Holmes. I work, like Jeff said, at the Department of Energy and Environment. I'm in the Urban Sustainability Administration, so this is sort of a small arm of the agency that houses our overarching sustainability plans for the district. And if I can figure out how to press the button, they'll slowly appear on the screen. So we have our big overarching umbrella plan, Sustainable DC, but we also have Climate Ready DC, which I work on, focused on climate adaptation. We have Carbon Free DC, which is focused on becoming carbon free. And most recently, Keep Cool DC, which is focused on dealing with the challenge of extreme heat. So I work on the climate team, and I'm explicitly focused on climate adaptation. So, well, the work that you just heard about in Maryland from Chris, and the similar work that's happening in the district around reducing greenhouse gases and going electric and becoming, carbon neutral in the 2040s is super important, and we need to do it. At the same time, we know that there's a lot of change in the climate that's already baked in, and even if we hit the almost, at this point, fantastical RCP, 1.2 that we saw this morning, you'll still see a rise in temperatures, and you'll still see changes in precipitation. So I work to help district government figure out how we're going to be preparing for that. So I only have a few slides here. Luckily, this one's just pictures. You heard a lot about the impacts of climate change that we can expect. Changes in temperature, changes in sea level rise and coastal storm surge, and in precipitation that can lead to inland flooding. And I can't believe it works. This is actually something that we're really focused on right now. Just recently, this past month, we had a flooding incident due to, so inland flooding is, we see precipitation. It's not related to the river, but it's related more to like land use, impervious surfaces, grading, the size of storm drains. We see flooding in areas due to development that we might not have seen before. This was last year. This is taken from inside of a doggy daycare on Rhode Island Avenue, which is a sort of a natural low point in an increasingly developing neighborhood. And a month ago, there was no video of it from inside, but that water was more than 3 times that, broke through the door, flooded the entire store in a matter of minutes, and killed 10 dogs and wounded some staff who were trapped inside for a while. The water rose in like a 6-minute window. So this is something that we know climate change is happening and has these future impacts, but we're seeing real challenges today that we have to prepare for. So I only have sort of 2 projects to talk about. The first one is a focus on blue-green infrastructure. And this is something that we're doing to address that inland flooding we see in the district. Blue-green infrastructure adds a whole new color to green infrastructure. But it's similar to how we see green infrastructure. You know, it absorbs stormwater, it treats the water and slows it down before running into the river. It's essentially adding a volume sort of storage capacity to that same approach. So can we use public right-of-way like the medians between streets or street designs themselves, combine that with open spaces like parks, and design them to hold like an excess amount of water to prevent that from flowing downstream. And this is something that has to be done on like a neighborhood scale or, you know, a tributary like sub-watershed scale for it to really have an impact, but it's something that we are working on. So these images are just a sample from one study that's a draft came out for public comment in the summer for the Southwest Buzzard Point neighborhood, where we're looking at like a whole network of these kinds of spaces that can have like a real flood risk reduction impact. And we're actually just now launching a collaboration with Prince George's County in Maryland, so across state lines, of figuring out how can we develop or design networks of these kinds of pieces of infrastructure on a watershed scale that crosses the border. So we have some you know, flood-prone neighborhoods with streams in them that originate in Maryland. So it really takes a regional effort to look at that issue. And then I just wanted to briefly talk about what we're doing in the climate adaptation planning universe. So Climate Ready DC is our sort of flagship plan. It has 77 actions to prepare for the impacts of climate change. But it's getting a little old. It was developed in 2015, published in 2016, which with the rate of change of everything these days feels like almost ancient history. So we're working to update that in the coming year. And one of the first steps we have to do is go back to the climate science that's referenced in that report and update it with the latest and greatest. It's based almost, I think, more than one IPCC report ago. So we have new best practice. And in addition to sort of getting the latest science, I think a big goal of this effort is to get all of our different agencies looking at the same science, because there's a lot of different tools out there. There's the NOAA Climate Explorer. There's our local, you know, the Mid-Atlantic RESA office has great IDF curves, but they might not be what one agency is using to look at precipitation than another agency. So we're trying to sort of streamline the approach. Matt talked about this morning of getting, you know, our different DDOT and our DOEE and DC water all using the same design storms when looking at stormwater. So that's something that we're working on right now, is to streamline what report they can look at. And then we're looking at the actual actions in Climate Ready DC. This box of Skittles up on the slide is all of the actions that are included in Climate Ready, in Resilient DC, which is a different plan, in Sustainable DC, and Keep Cool DC. We've developed all these plans over the years, and it starts to kind of, I think, confuse people about which one's the climate plan. So we need to go back and sort of streamline all of the great work that the district has done in the past 10 years to make it really clear what steps, and we're focused more on ourselves as government, like what steps do other agencies really need to do to institutionalize the idea of climate preparedness. So it's not just the stormwater issue, it's not just buildings that we're looking at, but like programming for schools, things like that. Are those agencies looking out 10 years ahead and projecting that temperatures will change, and that's going to impact what they need to do today? And that is happening in some pockets of district government, but not across the board. So that's one of the things we're focused on. We do a lot more than that, but I want to save time for discussion. So.
Thanks, Erin. Hello. Yep. Okay, thanks, Erin. Next, I want to introduce Katherine Rainone. Katherine is the Transportation Resilience Planner at MW Council of Governments, COG. Her work incorporates adaptation to the impacts of natural hazards on the region's transportation system, with creation of resilience planning and spearheading the first regional transportation resiliency implementation plan. Katherine has a degree in environmental planning and management from Johns Hopkins and a marine biodiversity and conservation from Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Katherine.
It's marine biology, I would have been earlier today, but it's conservation degree, so thank you for that. Okay, so as I was announced, I'm Katherine Rainone. I'm the Transportation Resilience Planner at Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments / Transportation Planning Board. I work in the Department of Transportation Planning. So while I'm a transportation resilience planner, I focus a lot on resilience with regards to the transportation industry in the Metro DC region. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yep. Yeah, that's fine. But I am here today to talk to you about water as much as I can. I'm presenting on some other folks' programs, not programs that I'm necessarily in charge of. So if you have questions about those programs in particular, Steve Beaver is here, can answer those, but I can also get back to you on those. So here we go. So I just figured I would do a little bit about what a council of governments is. Regional issues like extreme heat, stormwater, flooding, sewage issues, they don't have jurisdictional boundaries. They don't see the lines in between all of the localities that make up our region. So in the late 50s, federal designation decided to say, let's put together regional organizations that can work on issues of regional importance. So COG, Council of Governments, is an independent nonprofit association that was founded in the late 50s. And like it says here on the slide, it brings together area leaders to address regional issues and plan for the future. We have around 300 elected officials from 24 local governments, and that includes Maryland, Virginia, and DC, those state representatives and congressional representatives, and this region hosts, calls home more, 6 million residents call this region home. And COG is also home to the Transportation Planning Board, which is technically where I work, which is the region's metropolitan planning organization. So the TPB has mostly the similar jurisdictional boundaries, and it is the federally designated metropolitan planning organization. So a lot of the funding for transportation planning at a metro level comes from the federal government. It plays a really important role for regional transportation planning because the metro, as we know, doesn't only stay in DC, it also goes to Virginia and Maryland, and we have Virginia Railway Express. All of our roads interact with one another. So it's really important for all of the representatives of both the 3 state departments of transportation and the local governments to kind of have a forum where they can get together and plan for the future, talk about issues that are of regional importance that, again, don't stay at jurisdictional boundaries. I just wanted to point out some of the climate resilience goals that we have set at a regional level. We don't technically implement a lot of projects at COG and TPB, but we do work with the local jurisdictions in order to help them advance some goals that we set for the region to become, like this slide shows, a more resilient place. So in 2020, CEPC, which is the committee, I wrote this down with it stands out, the Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee, which was created in 2009 at COG. So per this committee's recommendation, which incorporated a lot of feedback from members throughout the region, the COG board and TPB board also affirmed the following 2 climate resilience goals of both becoming a climate ready region and making significant progress towards becoming a climate resilient region by 2030. I'm not going to read the goals out there. You can read those yourself. But these 2 goals are sort of what our whole region is trying to work towards when we're talking about climate resiliency, which is kind of a combination of the adaptation and mitigation things that we've been talking about from our two previous speakers. And while we do a lot of work on regional planning things and water resources and resiliency efforts, adaptation, mitigation, air quality work, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the various programs that we have going on at COG and TBB that have something to do with climate resiliency. I split the next 3 slides into 3 little categories. So the first category that I'll talk about is local planning. And we work closely with various localities on some of their local climate resilience plans and climate action plans. So our Department of Environmental Programs is working with Charles County, Fairfax County, Frederick County, and Prince George's County, as well as the cities of Frederick and Rockville. I think a couple of more are on the way to help put together climate action plans, climate resilience plans, anything sort of the local government is looking for to advance how they are putting together plans for adaptation for the future. We also work on site feasibility, planning, and design for anything from clean energy, electric vehicle charging deployment, which is something that is getting a lot of play recently, trying to put out how we're going to, as a region, charge electric vehicles and deploy them on a larger scale. Some things like microgrids and grid hardening, which is really important when you're talking about setting up a whole electric vehicle charging regional scale. Also, there's come about the idea of a resilience authority, which is something that Charles County has put together, which helps to create a legal entity or structure to secure, manage, and distribute money that comes in, whether it be from local grants or federal money to distribute that money for implementing climate action plans. So Charles County has one right now, and Prince George's County has is working with Department of Environmental Programs at COG to decide how to set one of these up. Does it make sense to set up a resilience authority to implement the Prince George's County's new climate action plan? COG has worked on a military installation resilience review with all of the 4 military installations in DC. So they worked closely with all 4 installations with DOD and the local government to assess climate risks and measures for installations. In DC, a lot of that works closely with the localities and installations on issues of resilience and climate risk they call it at the fence line. So right at the area where the land is shared between DC and the Department of Defense. And they are beginning phase 2 of that, we call it the MIR, which is going to incorporate planning for some implementation of some of the things that they found as recommendations from that study. And also we work on a regional tree canopy and urban heat island. The department that's working on that is sort of putting together some best practices for establishing tree canopy goals at a local and regional level. So moving on to some of the other resilience efforts in the water and emergency management sector. Obviously, I had to put a slide like this together because this is a water conference. So we coordinate various committees and subcommittees with regards to water quality, water security, monitoring, and drinking water emerging issues. And we have also worked on and are currently working on a variety of water-related studies. I was going to briefly talk about the Blue-Green Infrastructure Project, but Erin already talked about that, so we can skip right over that. But COG is also involved in that effort with DOEE and Prince George's County. We are also working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to assess the feasibility of some solutions to reduce long-term coastal flood risks in DC and Northern Virginia. A copy of one of the drafts for that report. That's just what that image is there on the slide. And we are also working on a regional water supply emergency and drought awareness response plan, and are going to use these findings in the 2023 regional drought exercise to update those plans. And we also host a committee that reviews energy and homeland security issues in the region. And then this is the stuff that I work on, the transportation slide. With the bipartisan infrastructure law that IIJA that came out from the federal government, a lot of money has been put into shoring up a lot of the infrastructure in the US for impacts from natural hazards. As it was impossible to ignore this past summer. It felt like every weekend there was some huge flooding event or extreme heat or drought or something that was impacting not only the country, but I was looking at it specifically by the transportation sector. A lot of flooded roadways, washed out bridges and stuff. So it's never been more, to me, never been more important to start looking at, like we said, with air quality monitoring and mitigation efforts to reduce greenhouse gases is something that MPOs have been working on for a long time. But just recently, in the past couple of years, the National Capital Region has decided that we need to start also thinking about things with regards to adaptation, like Erin was talking about. So one of the projects that I'm just making 1 year at TBB. So I'm working on wrapping up, well, not quite wrapping up, we're halfway through our transportation resilience improvement plan, which is one aspect of the PROTECT program, which is a federal funding program. It stands for Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation. So a lot of it is helping adapt transportation assets for the impacts of and risks of climate change. So here on the slide are some of the major impacts from things like extreme heat, coastal flooding, and sea level rise. I also don't want to minimize the inland flooding, which is noted in under heavy precipitation. But we're also looking at extreme winter conditions and extreme wind conditions, because when there's a lot of wind, trees can knock over onto roadways and train tracks. So we are working on this Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, aka the TRIP, and that will both put together a regional plan for showing the impacts of climate risks to the transportation system in the DC metro area, but also it will collect resilience projects that are being planned by DC, Maryland, and Virginia, the folks who are included in our region. And if those projects are included in this plan, they are funded by a PROTECT grant, they can reduce their local match. So usually when a project is funded by one of these federal programs, they'll get 80% of the funding from the federal government, but they locally will have to put in 20%. If they're included in this plan, then they only will have to put up 10%, and the feds will put up 90%. So it's a real good benefit for the local governments who want to put in a resilient project. So that is the main thing that I'm working on. And we're hosting a regional transportation resilience forum, which is on October 3rd. If you're interested, come see me after and I'll give you the information on how to join that. And then one other small project that I'm working on is, again, we heard about green infrastructure before, blue-green infrastructure. This is just going to be a green infrastructure project in Prince William County to try and help the local governments there put more green infrastructure requirements and guidelines into their design guidelines and proposed standards for their transportation projects. And that is just a small subsection of the projects that we're working on with regards to climate resiliency at COG and TPB. But I only had 8 minutes, so there you go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Katherine. Our next presenter couldn't be here in person today, but I'll still give her a quick introduction. We're going to do a pre-recorded presentation. So Megan Porta Porta, is an energy program specialist with the Energy Programs Office at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Megan is in this role. Megan assists with climate change resiliency goals and is heading the effort for PA's 2024 Climate Action Plan and Climate Impact Assessment. Megan has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from York College and a Master's in Science and Environmental Science and Policy from Johns Hopkins. With that.
My name is Megan Porta, an energy program specialist here in Pennsylvania's climate change program at the Department of Environmental Protection. Today, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of our state climate action plan, climate impacts assessment, and our local climate action program. So Pennsylvania has a Climate Change Act that was enacted in 2008, and it has several requirements. The two I'm going to focus on are, again, our climate impacts assessment and our climate action plan, both of which need to be updated every 3 years. We also have a climate change advisory committee that meets bi-monthly, and they are going to be crucial actually in the development of both of these plans. So our last CAP and CIA were published in 2021. So obviously 2024 is we're due for the next iteration. And we began working on both of these with our contractor in July. So we are just in the beginning of getting these updates underway. So referencing our 2021 impacts assessment, information that we gathered from that really is no surprise. Average temperatures and precipitation in our state is increasing. Precipitation in Pennsylvania increased by 10% since the early 20th century, and it's expected to increase by another 8% by 2050. And very similar with the average temperature. It's increased by more than 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's expected to increase by a whopping 5.9 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. And not only are average temperature and precipitation patterns expected to change, but so are the extremes. And this is a visual representation of the changes in both the high temperatures and very heavy precipitation that our state is expected to see at the current rate if we do not adapt or mitigate to climate change. And this table is taken straight from our 2021 climate impacts assessment. It shows the overall risk for each hazard and consequence category for the year 2050 based on our findings. And as you can see, increasing temperatures and floodings are the two biggest overall risks. As of today, as of right now, in the state of Pennsylvania, flooding is currently the highest risk hazard facing us. This affects built infrastructure, health, and agriculture, among many other things. Climate change, unfortunately, is going to affect vulnerable communities the most, and that's something that here in Pennsylvania we are really focusing on for our 2024 updates, is incorporating environmental justice into each step that we update. So our CAP, or Climate Action Plan, it lays out our pathway for achieving greenhouse reduction goals, and it outlines adaptation strategies. In our 2021 plan, we identified 18 strategies. Those were in electricity generation, transportation, agriculture, fuel supply, and residential and commercial buildings. That quantitative modeling shows we'll meet those goals. And this wedge chart just shows the modeled greenhouse gas reductions possible for each sector evaluated and included in the plan against the business as usual, which is the top line. Each of these sectors includes multiple individual strategies that are not broken out here, but this just gives you an overall idea. So the primary hazards that we addressed in the 2021 are really going to be the same for our 2024 2024 update. And that is increasing average temperatures, heat waves, and flooding. And again, I can't stress the focus on environmental justice enough. And that is something that we have, as a department-wide, really amped up our efforts. And it's going to be a huge component of our climate action plan for 2024. So our 2024 impacts assessment is going to include updates to climate projections and reflects the latest available incorporation on climate science and impacts. And this just shows you an overview of when we expect to have the drafts completed and those finalized documents. And I mentioned the Climate Change Advisory Committee earlier. And as you see, they are involved in this entire process. They are members of, comprised of legislators, private sector, public sector, other state agencies, et cetera. And we, along with our contractor, are presenting to them at each bi-monthly meeting to get their feedback and try to incorporate it as much as possible so that we encompass everything that they feel that we should add of concern in this new iteration. And this, I won't go into too much detail. It just shows our climate impacts assessment process. It's pretty straightforward. Again, we're updating 2021's, but the one thing I do want to point out on number 4 there, we're making a big effort to develop supplemental materials for the general public. Those folks that do not have a technical background who can further, to get a better grasp on how climate is affecting Pennsylvanians and what they can do to help mitigate that. And again, this is the same type of outline of our CAP process, which is going to be a bit meatier and is going to play off of our impacts assessment, which will be completed first. And again, we want to synthesize that technical information into something that the general public can understand. And here I'll end with some of our ongoing efforts. In particular, I really wanted to discuss our LCAP, the Local Climate Action Program. It's a program that we partnered here with Penn State University that allows local governments and college students to work together to develop greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plans. The LCAP determines a community's contribution to climate change and helps them develop plans to draw down emissions and adapt to climate change. And one of the big components of this program is engaging these local communities in the planning process. We do that via in-person workshops, virtual meetings, and sometimes online surveys. And we also have what's called the Shared Energy Manager Program, and that was developed in conjunction for the LCAP program, and it supports those governments that participate in the LCAP to implement their energy-related strategies that they formed in their climate action plans. It's been quite successful thus far, and like I said, we have now partnered with Penn State, and we've kind of taken a little bit of a back seat, and we manage all of that information as it comes in. But it's something that we're really proud of, and we're trying to really broaden in the state of Pennsylvania. So that is it. Again, here's my contact information. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions or just want a little more information on some of the things that I discussed here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Megan. I'm told that Megan has actually joined us by WebEx, so hopefully she can hear us. So we're going to do, I think we're going to go to about 2:05, so we're going to do one quick round of questions for all the panelists. And just going to ask each panelist to maybe do a quick response, 2-minute response to this question is, how can individuals and organizations in your state get involved in climate readiness activities? So hand it off to you first, Erin.
Well, specifically in the district, we have guides for how to get involved. Our Homeland Security Emergency Management Agency has ready.dc.gov that has all these lists of how to prepare for everything that could possibly go wrong. And they're updating it right now with sort of new materials, and they're focusing a lot on climate issues because they get a lot of questions about it, especially flooding and extreme heat. So there's, learning how to like make a preparedness kit and things like that for extreme heat. I tell everybody to plant like an oak tree. Trees are this amazing technology invented millennia ago that are like the best bang for your buck for climate adaptation. We're also, our agency offers some services to residents to help them prepare. So we have a Flood Smart Homes program that is aimed at homeowners that live in a flood risk area. We'll send an auditor out to check out the property, identify, and we will help implement strategies to reduce the risk of flooding and damage on that property. So there's a few things that DC Gov does.
At COG TBB, most of our meetings and plans are public. A lot of people don't know that you can come to our meetings and you can check out the agenda beforehand. If there's an agenda item that you're interested in providing public comment on, we welcome that. And we also currently, for example, have out the Visualized 2045, which is our long-range transportation plan. Again, I'm talking about transportation. We are collecting comments on the project lists from the states. So every state has to submit all of their planned transportation projects for this long-range transportation plan. So if you have any comments, that comment period is open as the agencies are working on re-examining what projects they're going to submit for our 2050 long-range plan. We get a lot of comments. A lot of people are interested in telling us what they think about potential road expansions or planning for new rail lines and stuff like that. And those always have an environmental or a climate component. So you're free to comment on those. And again, like I said, there's the Transportation Resilience Forum, which is happening on October 3rd. So you are welcome to attend that. It's going to be hybrid, so there will be a virtual option. And again, as we are a regional agency, we work with all 3 states and all the local governments. So if you are a member of the local government or one of the states, just sort of supporting regionalism is going to help with these larger issues that don't have state or local boundaries.
So the question was about climate readiness. You might have gathered from my presentation that I'm not giving up on fighting climate change. I'm going to mitigate. So I would argue that everyone has a role and an opportunity to help fight that through your own actions. Because we still have to. We know the climate is changing. We know we have to adapt. We know we have to get ready, but we can lessen that impact if we all contribute to that. So everybody consumes electricity. There's opportunity for you to engage with. In my case, the Department of the Environment next Tuesday. We have the last of 6 listening sessions on our plan should say. I mentioned that Maryland is a leader. People look to Maryland on climate change, so that in and of itself has value. Nobody wants to be first with big politically risky policies, but we have a 60% reduction goal, so we have no other choice but to advance policies that are going to be politically risky. Engage with the elected officials if you can, because they're going to be in the hot seat to either say yay or nay to some of these things that we know we have to do if we're going to fight climate change to the extent that we need to. Our commission process, like Pennsylvania's and DC's, that's also public. So there's an opportunity to offer public comment in all those commission meetings. If I had my druthers, I would copy paste the report that the commission produces every year into an email to all the legislators in the state, because if what Maryland needs to do to act climate change is in that report. It's just a question of whether or not our elected officials read it. I'm exaggerating, but our legislators are going to be key because they're going to supplement the regulatory action that I talked about before. So just activism. I mean, activism still counts, and activism is taking on a different form these days. But you can still, and activism means educating yourself and engaging with decision makers and policymakers.
Good stuff. Thanks, Chris. Megan, if you could hear us, if you have an
Yes, I
opportunity to
can.
respond. Great.
Yeah, just very quickly, I went over the main effort that we're doing is that LCAP program, and that is specifically to engage local government municipalities and citizens of those municipalities to make them more aware and to get their localized action plans ready. And also, again, I mentioned the Climate Change Advisory Committee. That's always been open to the public. They can attend virtually or in person. So that's another way that we try to engage citizens in our state.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Well, I think we're about out of time, so maybe just want to say thank you to the panel. This is really great information, and it's heartening to see so many people working so hard on these issues. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So we come to session 5, which is implementation. And our moderator for this session is Steve DeRidder. He has been the superintendent of operations with Berkeley County, West Virginia, for 23 years, and also an adjunct Blue Ridge Community College. His hobby is fishing. I'd just like to say that Steve and I now have crossed paths in the last 6 weeks in three times, which is pretty remarkable considering he's from West Virginia and I live in Arlington and I work in Rockville. But we got to stop meeting like this, Steve. So anyway, I'd like to introduce Steve, and he'll be the moderator of session 5, which is called implementation.
Thank you. So for this last session here for session 5, our first speaker is Jenny Willoughby. She is with the city of Frederick. She is the sustainability manager for the city of Frederick, where she manages 7,500 acre watershed, the Tree Frederick program, stream restoration, among other tasks. She is an ISA board certified master arborist and earned a BS in forestry and wildlife from Virginia Tech and an MS in geographic and cartographic sciences from George Mason University.
Not on? Yeah? Okay, good. You keep that one. All right. So I'm going to go through some really quick stuff about watershed management. We're going to switch gears. Everybody else had a lot of data. I'm going to give you a lot of people. This is a very different type of talk. We do collect data in the watershed. It actually informs our management plan. It's how we come to the decisions that we make about how we're going to manage this 7,500 acre forested watershed that protects part of the city's water supply. So I can't take credit for this picture. This was stolen from someone at DNR Fisheries. Thank you. I think it was John Milliken who gave it to me. I just stole it because we have a lot of brook trout in the watershed. It's one of the last places that has brook trout. So we protect them as best we can. So this is sort of the lowdown of what we're gonna go over. I'll give you the watershed history in a minute. It's a lot, it's more than 100 years old. So I'm gonna attempt to do that. We're gonna go over some top challenges, some solutions, and some things that have worked and not worked. This is something that I spend some of my days on, not all of my days on, and it keeps me up at night. So literally with police calls. So we'll get into that in a minute. Actually, let's go back. Let's do the watershed history in a minute. I put up this slide because how many of you know a little bit about history of forest management in Maryland? Okay, who was our first state forester? Fred Besley. He's the one who actually made this map, and it lives in the basement of my building. And I dug it out because I wanted to see what our watershed looked like in 1913. And this is what it looked like. It's still colored pencil markings. It's very faint, but that's what it is. And when we looked at that, we said, well, our management plan is actually pretty good based on what was there before. We know we had a lot of chestnut. We know we had a lot of pine. We had a lot of burned over areas. We had all kinds of really great chestnut oak stands. So we're doing a pretty good job trying to bring that back as best we can. Throughout the early 1900s, people used to burn the watershed purposefully so they could get blueberries. And so we had a lot of fires. So we didn't have a lot of forest because people kept burning it. And these things kind of got out of hand. And then we had drought, and that just made the wildfires even worse. And then we started with the CCC came in, built a bunch of fire roads for us. So we had a way to actually get to the fires. We had 2 fire towers installed. Those have been since decommissioned. And now we have a really nice forest stand, really clean water. And it serves about 20% of our water supply for the city. We have 4 water sources, and this is just the one that we own outright. It is the only one we own outright. The other sources are Linganore Creek, Monocacy River, and an interconnection agreement with the county for the Potomac. So those are our 4 sources. This is the only one that we can really do anything about, though. So did I do it in a minute? That was the history. So the top challenges to forest management, I put user groups in bold. That is my biggest challenge, is user groups. It can also be my biggest benefit, but my biggest challenge is user groups. Those are the people that give me the most headache and keep me up at night, and they're the ones I get called about on a Saturday night. So that's probably top thing that I deal with. Rare, threatened, endangered species, that is a top priority in addition to water, of course. We had a new one added this year, the long-eared bat. Very soon we're going to get 2 more bats. So I'll have 25 threatened and endangered species in this watershed, 7,500 acres. And it's hard to manage them when people go and make trails right through their habitat illegally. So that's one of my biggest challenges. Education. I do a lot of hikes. Thank you to Renee, who organizes some hikes in the watershed. I also lead other hikes throughout the year in the watershed just to help people understand why it's there, what it is, so they can understand where their water comes from. People have no idea that the creeks that they tromp through and over are actually their water supply. So it's a great way to explain that to them. Markets. So the watershed is the largest tree farm in the state of Maryland. So we do harvest, sustainably harvested now, and we can't harvest a lot because there aren't any markets. So I have not been doing a lot of harvesting for pulpwood, which is the main thing I can pull off of the watershed, because we have to get rid of some of the crummy trees so our good trees can come up. So if I don't have anywhere to sell those and have an operator come in and take a bunch, then I have a problem because I can't fix that stand except by hand. And I got 1 DNR forester and a technician for 7,500 acres. And yeah, they can go out with chainsaws, but how long is it going to take them to harvest 100 acres? It's a pretty big job. So it's better to do it with a piece of equipment and then get that to market. We don't care about the money. We're not in it to make money. We're in it to restore stands. So that's not what that's about. It's just there's nobody there to take it. So, and then funding. I don't get any money to do anything in the watershed. The money all goes to the water supply. So at the bottom of the mountain where the reservoir is, that's where all the money goes. I see no money for putting in gates. I had to beg for those. I see no money for road maintenance. That can be a good and bad thing. It makes people slow down when you have a lot of potholes. I have to beg for them to clean up the car-sized potholes that will impede our emergency equipment, though, if we have to get, some sort of a fire truck or anything up there. So funding is probably my biggest issue as far as like taking care of some of these things. But I don't really need money for the rare, threatened, and endangered species, because DNR can help me with that. It's fighting back against the user groups that I need the funding for. So it becomes a problem. Not a challenge is the actual forest. That's easy for me to manage. I can do that in my sleep. That's the easy part. It's the people. So here are a few solutions that we've come up with. Some have worked and some have not, like I said. So one of the solutions that we came up with that is been awesome was gates. The first thing we had to do was actually get the roads back from the county, because the watershed is a jurisdictional nightmare. The watershed is not contiguous with the city boundaries. It actually lives in the county. So do you think the city is able to go up there and actually write any tickets for anything? Nope. The county has to do that, or Natural Resources Police. We can't do that. So what we did was we actually got control of the roads and then put gates on them so we could control the traffic that went in and we could see what was happening. We had a lot of dumping issues before I started doing this whole gate thing. We had about 6 tons of trash collected before we put the gates in. That was every year. And now we're down to, I don't know, less than a ton. And that all comes from our neighbors. I knew that putting the gates in was going to push all the trash to our neighbors. So we now do a cleanup that's like the whole mountain, because there's not a lot in the watershed anymore. It's like, you know, a cup here or a bottle there, but it's not dumping. It's not a whole apartment. So those have been great. Trail closures. If you read the newspaper last year, I had my head on a pike because I closed some trails. People were really mad. They knew it was coming for 6 years and they still got angry. So that's a big issue, but we are closing them because they're over threatened and endangered species habitat. They were built illegally. They knew we needed to close them and they still got angry. Cameras, my cameras always get stolen or thrown in the mud or smashed. Just recently I found a couple and they were fine. It's just the batteries had exploded in one and the housing was cracked in the other. So I got to replace them. You know, they get old after a while. Thankfully, these are 2 cameras that lasted and aged out of the system. But that's what usually happens is they get stolen. Solutions, a big solution is partnerships. We have a lot of great partnerships on the watershed. Mid-Atlantic Off-Road Enthusiasts, they're good and bad. Get into that in a minute. They help manage the trails. We also have DNR, forestry, wildlife, fisheries, ton of people up there help us manage that watershed. We do allow hunting. So that is, you know, one of the components up there. If I didn't allow hunting, I wouldn't have any baby trees. So we're managed very differently from the parks that surround us. We're between Gambrel and Cunningham State Parks. And Gambrel does not allow hunting. Cunningham has a little piece that you're allowed to hunt in, but you can very easily tell when you're going between Gambrel and the watershed. It's almost a very stark line because hunting is allowed in the watershed and not in Gambrel. So that's a good partnership too. The tree farm designation, like I talked about before, that just means that we are looking at all aspects of things. We're looking at wildlife, recreation, wood products. We're putting all those things together when we come up with a harvest plan. Invasive species management, that has become a yearly thing for us, and we always are adding new invasive species. And spotted lanternfly, of course, is on our radar right now. We haven't done anything about it. We don't have that much ailanthus left in the watershed. That's their favorite tree, is tree of heaven. And we've already tackled most of it. So we haven't actually seen big populations of it. Not yet anyway. We see big populations of it elsewhere, but in Frederick, but not in the watershed. And prescribed burns. This was from one of our prescribed burns a couple of years ago. We use this to help us restore different stands, particularly our pine and oak stands. So that has become one of our best solutions. We're getting ready to use it for invasive species management too. We don't use it for fuel reduction. That's one misconception. So what's worked and what's not worked? So some of the things that have worked really, really well, my gates, Direct outreach, that has worked really well through the hikes and giving talks. I'll be doing a Watershed Fires talk. If you want to attend, if you're in the Frederick area next month, you're welcome to attend at Seaber Arts. And I'll talk all about the history of the watershed and the fires. And then, of course, active forest management. That is a big one. Our DNR forester and technician are up there every day identifying what needs to be done. They're coming up with work plans. They're doing the prescribed burn plans. They're telling me when somebody opened a trail again, and we got to go close it, all those kinds of things. So that's been really helpful. And they put together a story map for our burn areas to explain why we do prescribed burns. And we do have a fire adapted landscape up there. So it's really critical for us to have fire and reintroduce it so that we can get those species back. Firewood permits, it's neither here nor there. People don't want to buy the permit. It's $20. They'll just go steal it off the roadside. So that's what usually happens. But we do have them. And we have another permit where you can actually get an acre of land and you can go harvest from that. That really hasn't worked either. People don't want to put in the work. They'd rather just like steal it. So that's kind of an iffy thing. Things that have also sort of worked, messaging through partners. So I mentioned more. They've been okay, but they don't want us to close any trails. And so they maybe won't tell anybody that we're closing a trail. We usually reroute for various reasons, like it's going over a fisheries habitat, it could be, or it's going over threatened and endangered species habitat. And our messaging hasn't gotten out to the people that it needs to get out to, or just ignoring it. And trail closures, those are ignored. We just had a new one reopened and it was over our most endangered species habitat. We closed it last November, so it stayed closed for 10 months. I was really happy about that, but we have to go and reclose it again. So again, that's sort of some of the things that we have problems with. And when you look at the overall picture of this, this is our water supply. That is the number one thing that we're doing in the watershed. We are protecting our water supply. People don't care. It's the people who I'm having problems with. So we really have to work on that part. I think that the hikes and doing talks and stuff gets the word out and helps people understand and makes them stewards. That's our biggest, effort is to get stewards up there so that they will tell on each other. That's what I really want, is for people to tell on each other. Anyway, that's it. And I'll be here around for questions afterwards.
Our next group of speakers are Leah Staub, Andrew Sekellick, and Tristan Mohs. They are all physical scientists with the USGS at the Maryland, Delaware, DC Water Science Center, and are all members of the Justice, Quality, Diversion, and Inclusion Committees. And with that, I'll turn it over to them. Any other information, you can look at the book.
Thank you. Right, so I'm glad Jenny talked about human beings, and earlier Than talked about connecting with people. So I'm Andrew, this is Tristan, and this is Leah. And the three of us are physical scientists, so we are famously not very good at connecting with people. We make a lot of charts and look at squiggly lines going up and down and make some maps with red and green splotches. And so this work kind of started with the three of us just kind of impromptu talking about how we can step outside our comfort zone and look at our models and our kind of existing data and talk about what it actually means for people and how it might affect different groups of people differently. So we'll also talk about monitoring. We do a little bit of field work and sometimes in our studies, a Watershed that we'll call like a developed or urban stream is really a wealthy suburb. It's not always true, but that often is true. So we kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit too. But this work is still very much in pilot phase. We recently got funding to actually work on it, which is exciting. So we're really looking forward to continuing this work, as well as working with some human geographers and social scientists that within the USGS that can help us talk about and talk with people.
Okay, so what exactly is a vulnerable community? Essentially, from what we've looked into and read, when a natural disaster happens, like a tornado, earthquake, a major flooding event, which we've been seeing more of, or even something more long-term, like air pollution, when these things occur, different communities are affected more than others. And this is generally due to a history of neglect and marginalization. So with this project, we want to look at these communities and see if there's any patterns with water quality in them. And it can be difficult to define a vulnerable community. And we found a couple ways to do it. So there's various compounding factors you can use, like poverty or housing or minority status, just to name a few that Tristan will go over, many more soon. But they can be used to help describe a community's historical influence and their present day challenges, which can then be used to help to describe their level of vulnerability. And we're not trying to say that these communities have tornadoes ripping through them, just them. Or we're not trying to say that there's always a dark storm cloud looming overhead of them. What we're saying is that they are having difficulty enduring these disasters as well as bouncing back from them. Okay, so these are some news articles that we found about air pollution, and they're all asking who exactly is being affected by air quality. And we wanted to put these up here just to show that people are talking about this. And then the next slide has news articles that are asking who exactly is reaping the benefits of disaster aid. And this was, a lot of these we found from a story map made by a Chesapeake Bay program student intern, and they specifically looked into flooding and inequity in Maryland. So yeah, we just wanted to show that people are talking about it. Oh, and then why should the USGS get involved in this and be asking these questions? We found a handful of initiatives that are priorities for the DOI, Department of the Interior, and the federal government that we think this project aligns with. And again, our project is looking for what water quality parameters look like in these vulnerable communities.
So like Andy said, none of us are social scientists. We don't have that background. We're really lucky in that the CDC goes ahead and does a lot of that legwork for us. They put out the SVI, which is a social vulnerability index. It's about, I want to say 16 factors that make up what makes a vulnerable community, then divided into themes. And the SVI has been calculated since 2000 and continues to be every time we do a new census data. The nice part about what they do is they flag a factor if it's in the top 10%, so the most vulnerable of that factor, they flag it for us in their data set so that we don't have to go through and do any of that work. And then those themes can further kind of group those flagging. So with those, we're able to then tie it to further data. And for the purposes of this, we're going to be using minority status and language. Also, as a disclaimer, there are a lot of other vulnerability indexes that we could use. Preliminarily, we just used the SVI because it was the easiest for us to access. We've talked to a few different groups about other indices that we could use.
Right. So we've been working on looking at that information in conjunction with the Sparrow water quality model. And so Sparrow water quality models, there's a handful of them. We're using a Northeast regional model, which includes the Chesapeake Bay watershed. These water quality models combine things like climate data, landscape characteristics, with water quality measurements at gauges throughout the watershed to make predictions about water quality throughout the watershed, wall-to-wall coverage. So your resulting information after you combine that and run, it's a spatially referenced regression model. You get wall-to-wall predictions, in this case of total nitrogen, phosphorus, and also flow and sediment.
So, like I said, we started to use that theme on minority status and language for a lot of our kind of initial results as we were looking through everything. And very clearly, so this graph here shows the flagging of these themes. So 1 flag is either minority or speaks English less than well, 2 is both, and 0 is none. We related that to phosphorus in this case, and we saw a pretty clear correlation between the two just from kind of our preliminary look that we did. There are definitely ways we can do our joins better. We can make this more statistically significant, but this was just kind of here, let's take a look at it. So obviously, as you guys all know, excessive nutrients in streams and water bodies can lead to HABs, can lead to drinking water treatment issues, and other negative health effects.
Right, and so the map on the right is our estimated total phosphorus loads in streams throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So the map on the left shows our CDC social vulnerability index for the theme 3 flags. The dark red is 2 flags, the orange-ish is 1 flag. And you can see kind of where those overlap. You'll have higher phosphorus loads as well as those 2 flags signifying minority status and English proficiency. So we have some hot spots on the map on the left in areas that you might expect, like Baltimore City and Washington, D.C. But you also have a handful outside of those, particularly on the eastern shore, the Chesapeake Bay, and a handful of spots in, say, like the Shenandoahs and parts of rural Virginia and Appalachia. And so from a kind of a brief look, we think this might be farm worker communities, especially on the eastern shore, where you have like H-2 visa workers. But that's definitely something we need to explore more and talk with our social scientist friends that we work with.
So for those of you who don't know, USGS operates a stream gauge network throughout the whole US. That's kind of something that we're very much known for. And we use them for, flood warnings, infrastructure design, floodplain mapping, all very important things that we've talked about, especially after all the presentations that have gone on today. What we wanted to do as kind of a moving on step is figure out where we're representing vulnerable communities with these gauges. And so then we can kind of inform how we would build them.
Right, and once we can identify some water quality patterns, we want to move into the gauge network. And we have a pre-existing workflow that already exists that will take the gauge network and will look at how well representative it is of different land use types. This specific one is using NLCD right now. And we just thought it would be interesting if we looked at the SVI indices and see how the network is representing all the different flags. And this can also be utilized to kind of do a gap analysis to see what isn't being represented. So we just thought just like a basic overview would be something interesting to do.
Yeah, and so that workflow there is kind of like a easy-ish first look at how our monitoring network represents different factors in the watershed, which can be used for different priorities. So sometimes that priority might be flooding, and that can get complicated because if you may want a gauge just upstream of where you are, as opposed to monitoring for nutrients, where a gauge just downstream might be useful. So it can get a little bit tricky. But another workflow that is actually specifically built to optimize monitoring networks for water quality models, specifically Sparrow, can really get at the factors that improve how well our models can make predictions. So they'll look at basically the watershed that you're creating a model for, the sources and landscape conditions that are used in that model, and give you specific locations where you could improve your network to improve your models then. So part of that could be using that workflow to include some human factors to optimize your network too. So that's some future work that we're kind of still writing up a proposal for that we hope to make happen soon-ish, eventually, when we have time. So next steps, right? We just looked at theme 3, which was the minority status and English proficiency. Because the CDC SVI is made up of a whole bunch of census data, really. So there's also other information in there that we definitely want to look at as well. And then, of course, in theory, we're using Sparrow data right now, but we could be looking at other models or spatial data layers. Toxics is one that's come up, and the Chesapeake Bay program CAS model and pesticides and that type of thing. So we'd also like to do a gauge network analysis, and we're working on bringing that proposal forward soon. And then, as part of this project, we've all learned a lot, and looking forward to connecting with actual people. We showed a lot of squiggly lines here too, and maps with splotches on them. But part of this would also involve kind of presenting this data to the community. So at some point, we're going to have to get better at communicating. So
Also, further taking that from just the community also to our management staff for finding out where we can kind of try to reach out to local groups and have them hopefully be able to get funding a lot easier if data is there to back it up and say, hey, this is a vulnerable community and we're not being represented. Give us money so we can get one of these gauges in.
Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Testing. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Steve, and it was a great panel discussion there. So now we've covered a lot of ground on science, policy, and implementation around climate change in the Potomac Basin. Discussions like this are certainly needed to pave an equitable path forward. Thanks to all our great speakers. Thank ICPRB staff and all of you for coming and making this a great success. But it's not over yet. Please stay for the poster session to continue the dialogue and learn about other programs and research related to climate change in the Potomac Basin. And that's out there, correct? Right. So that's I'm really looking forward to looking at the posters. So I'd like to ask all of you to please plan on attending our 3rd annual Potomac River Conference this time next year. And now we're looking for sponsors for that event. And sponsorship is a great way to reach the water influencers, to showcase your employees as speakers, and to help us select a topic for next time. So hopefully we'll get some sponsors for this and continue it year after year, just like we had many years ago. But this will be the 3rd annual for next year. So anyway, I want to thank you all. I want to thank Fairfax Water for the use of the hall and for everybody who's contributed to this great day together. So with that, I'd like to say safe travel and check out the posters. Thank you.